Hello and welcome. Tonight, we're setting off on a quiet journey along the timeless Nile, through golden sands and ancient temples. This is the story of ancient Egypt, a land of pharaohs, pyramids, and gods. From its rise to its fall, Egypt's legacy lives on in stone and legend. So if you're ready to unwind, settle in, and drift off to the echoes of history, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's begin. The land of the pharaohs. In the northeastern corner of Africa lies a ribbon of life, winding its way through an ocean of sand. The Nile River, eternal, steady, patient, flows northward from deep within the continent, shaping everything in its path. Long before cities rose, before pyramids pierced the sky, or temples echoed with hymns to the gods, the Nile had already begun its work. It carved through rock and desert, flooding the land with rich, dark silt, transforming arid plains into lush, green banks. And it was here, along these generous shores, that one of the world's most awe-inspiring civilizations took root. Ancient Egypt was born not just from the ingenuity of its people, but from the landscape itself. Each year, like clockwork, the Nile would rise with the rains far to the south, bringing water and nutrients that turned dry earth into fertile farmland. This dependable cycle, the inundation, was at the center of Egyptian life. It dictated when to plant and when to harvest. It structured the calendar and fed the economy. The river was a living, breathing god, a provider, a protector, and a unifier. This fertile land stretched in a narrow strip on either side of the river, bordered by harsh desert on both flanks. To the west lay the vast Sahara, an unbroken expanse of golden silence. To the east, rocky hills and dry valleys led to the Red Sea. These natural barriers shielded Egypt from frequent invasion, allowing its culture to flourish relatively undisturbed for centuries. Within this cradle of stability, villages sprang up, growing slowly into towns, and towns into cities. Over time, two distinct regions emerged: Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. The names are geographical, based on the river's flow. Upper Egypt lies upriver, closer to the Nile's source, while Lower Egypt encompasses the broad delta, where the river fans out into many channels before meeting the Mediterranean. Though they shared cultural traits, the two regions developed unique political identities and local deities. Upper Egypt revered the vulture goddess Nekhbet, Lower Egypt, the cobra goddess Wadjet. Their differences would eventually be reconciled, but not before a monumental unification that would change the course of history. Legend tells of a king named Narmer, also known as Menes, who came from Upper Egypt and conquered the north, uniting the two lands under a single crown. He wore the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, combining them into the double crown, or pskent, symbolizing unified rule. This act of unification, around 3100 BCE, marked the beginning of the First Dynasty and the dawn of pharaonic Egypt. The pharaohs who followed inherited more than political power. They inherited a divine role. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was a god on earth. The people believed he was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky, and upon death, he became Osiris, ruler of the underworld. This divine kingship formed the bedrock of Egyptian society. It was the pharaoh's sacred duty to uphold Ma'at, the cosmic order, truth, and harmony that held the universe together. Ma'at was more than just justice. It was the principle that kept the Nile flowing, the stars in their courses, and society functioning. Every act of governance, every ritual, every law was aimed at preserving this sacred balance. And so, the pharaoh became the axis upon which Egypt's universe turned. He led armies into battle, mediated with the gods through rituals, oversaw construction of temples, and ensured the prosperity of his people. Beneath the pharaoh stood an intricate web of officials, priests, and scribes. The vizier, second only to the king, managed the day-to-day workings of the state. Regional governors, or nomarchs, oversaw Egypt's provinces, called nomes. Temples acted as both religious centers and economic hubs, managing vast tracts of land and employing thousands. Scribes were the intellectual elite of Egypt. Trained from a young age, they mastered the complex system of hieroglyphs, a script of symbols representing sounds, objects, and ideas. With their pens of reed and ink of soot and ochre, scribes recorded everything: royal decrees, harvests, trade records, and prayers. Their work preserved Egypt's history, beliefs, and daily life for millennia to come. Religion infused every corner of existence. The Egyptian pantheon was vast and nuanced, with gods and goddesses representing every element of the world, from the sky and the sun to love, war, and wisdom. Ra, the sun god, sailed across the sky by day and through the underworld by night. Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, comforted the grieving and protected the innocent. Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of the dead, guided souls to the afterlife. Temples were constructed to honor these deities, each a microcosm of the universe. Entering a temple meant passing through layers of sacred space, from the outer courtyard to the dark, hidden sanctuary where the god's statue was kept. Only priests, purified by ritual, could enter the innermost chamber. Offerings of incense, bread, beer, and incense were made daily, and festivals filled the calendar with music, dance, and processions. But while temples reached for the heavens, Egyptian homes were grounded in daily rhythm. Most Egyptians lived in mud brick houses, modest and practical, clustered near the fields they worked. Life followed the cycles of the Nile. Akhet, the season of flooding; Pereh, the season of planting; and Shemu, the season of harvest. Families rose with the sun, farmed during the day, and returned at dusk to share simple meals of bread, beer, and vegetables. Fish from the river and fruit from groves added variety. Women in Egypt held a remarkable degree of freedom for the ancient world. They could own property, initiate divorce, and appear in court. Some worked as priestesses, musicians, or weavers. Though men held most official positions, women's contributions to family, religion, and the economy were deeply valued. Children were cherished and often depicted playing games or learning trades from their parents. Education, though limited to the elite, was available to both boys and girls in temple schools. Young boys with promise might become scribes or priests. Others would inherit the professions of their fathers, learning the skills of farming, pottery, weaving, or craftsmanship. Craftsmen and laborers formed the backbone of Egypt's achievements. From intricate jewelry to grand monuments, their work was both artistic and devotional. They worked in guilds, lived in well-organized communities, and were paid in grain, beer, and other essentials. In the village of Deir el Medina, artisans who carved tombs in the Valley of the Kings left behind personal letters, records, and graffiti, offering a vivid window into their lives. Trade was vital to Egypt's wealth and influence. Merchants sailed up and down the Nile and ventured beyond its borders, exchanging grain, papyrus, and linen for gold, incense, cedar, and lapis lazuli. Egypt's neighbors, Nubia, the Levant, Punt, and Mesopotamia, brought not only goods, but stories, technology, and ideas. As Egypt grew in wealth and complexity, its cities blossomed. Memphis, near modern-day Cairo, served as an early capital, bustling with markets, palaces, and administrative offices. Thebes in the south became a religious center, its skyline dominated by the towering temples of Karnak and Luxor. These cities pulsed with life, from morning rituals to evening markets, from temple processions to royal decrees. Despite the stability and grandeur, Egypt was not without challenges. Famine, rebellion, and succession crises occasionally disrupted the flow of order. When pharaohs grew weak or the gods seemed silent, the people turned to local leaders or to new dynasties. Yet through each upheaval, the essential character of Egypt endured. At its core, Egypt was a civilization of harmony between human and divine, between land and river, between present and eternal. The pharaoh was its shepherd, the Nile its heartbeat, and its people the keepers of an ancient wisdom. For more than 3,000 years, Egypt thrived. And at the center of it all stood the land of the pharaohs, eternal, sacred, and serene. The construction of the pyramids. When we think of ancient Egypt, a single image often rises in the mind. A golden sun casting its glow over vast deserts, and in the distance, towering monuments of impossible scale and symmetry. The pyramids. Silent, stoic, and shrouded in mystery, they have stood for over 4,000 years, guardians of the past and whispers of eternity. Among them, the Great Pyramid of Giza looms above all, a structure so perfectly constructed that it still defies full comprehension. But to understand these marvels, we must step back into a time when a pharaoh's vision could shape the horizon, and when thousands labored not only to build, but to honor, to serve, and to believe. The pyramids were not just tombs, they were symbols of divine authority, of cosmic balance, and of the pharaoh's eternal life. They were not constructed out of vanity, but out of a profound belief in the afterlife, a conviction that death was not an end, but a doorway to something greater. The origin of pyramid construction begins modestly, with a tomb unlike any before it. It was the third dynasty, around 2670 BCE, and a pharaoh named Djoser ruled the land. To honor his death, his architect, a genius priest named Imhotep, devised a revolutionary idea. Instead of a traditional mastaba, a flat-roofed rectangular tomb, he stacked several atop one another, forming what we now know as the Step Pyramid. The Step Pyramid at Saqqara was the world's first large-scale stone monument. Rising in 6 distinct levels, it was encased in smooth limestone and surrounded by ceremonial courtyards, chapels, and colonnades. For the first time in history, stone had been transformed into permanence, into legacy, and Imhotep, the architect, would later be deified himself, remembered as a patron of wisdom and healing. But this was only the beginning. Subsequent pharaohs sought to refine and perfect the design. Sneferu, the founder of the fourth dynasty, took pyramid building to new heights, literally and metaphorically. He commissioned multiple pyramids, experimenting with structure, angle, and materials. His first attempt, the Maiden Pyramid, began as a step design, but was later modified to appear smooth. Unfortunately, the outer casing collapsed, and the structure lies in ruins today. Undeterred, Sneferu tried again. At Dashur, he built the bent pyramid, a curious structure that rises sharply before abruptly changing angle near the top. This shift was likely due to structural concerns or changes mid-construction. Still, the pyramid stands to this day, a testament to bold ambition and evolving engineering. Sneferu's third attempt, the Red Pyramid, was a success. With its smooth sides and careful angles, it is often considered the first true pyramid. Rising serenely from the desert, it set the standard for what was to come. It was Sneferu's son, however, who would truly immortalize the art of pyramid building. Khufu, also known as Cheops, ascended the throne around 2589 BCE. Determined to leave a mark unlike any before, he chose a plateau west of the Nile near present-day Cairo. It was here that the Great Pyramid of Giza would rise. For centuries, scholars, archaeologists, and engineers have debated how this structure was built. We know it originally stood about 146 meters high, over 480 feet, with a base covering more than 13 acres. Over 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, each weighing between 2 and 80 tons, were meticulously placed. The precision is astonishing. The sides of the base differ by mere centimeters, and the corners align almost perfectly with the cardinal points of the compass. But how was it done? First, the site was leveled. This may sound simple, but achieving a perfectly flat foundation over such a vast area without modern tools was a feat in itself. Workers likely used water-filled trenches to identify high and low points, carving away rock and building up where needed. The resulting platform was as stable and true as any modern foundation. The quarrying of stone began nearby. Most of the limestone blocks came from the plateau itself, while the finer white limestone used for the outer casing was transported from Tura across the river. Granite for the inner chambers was brought from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. These stones were floated down the Nile on massive barges during the flood season when the river ran high. The workforce, once mythologized as slaves, was in fact a highly organized, skilled labor force. Archaeological evidence, including workers' villages found near the pyramids, suggests that thousands of Egyptians labored in rotating shifts, supported by vast kitchens, medical care, and religious institutions. These workers were well fed and well managed, proud of their role in building something sacred. The actual lifting and placing of stones is still debated. Some scholars believe large ramps were built, either straight, zigzagging, or encircling the pyramid. These ramps allowed teams to drag stones upward using sledges, ropes, and lubricated tracks. Copper tools were used to shape limestone. Harder stones like granite were pounded and polished using dolerite hammers. Inside the pyramid, chambers and passageways were constructed with incredible foresight. The Great Pyramid contains 3 main chambers: the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and an unfinished subterranean chamber. The Grand Gallery, a sloped corridor nearly 30 feet high, leads to the King's Chamber, lined with granite blocks and capped with relieving chambers to distribute weight. The mathematical and astronomical precision of the pyramid is staggering. The base is aligned to true north with less than 3/60th of a degree of error. Some believe the dimensions encode significant numbers, like pi or the golden ratio, though others caution against reading too deeply. Regardless, the precision reflects a civilization with a deep understanding of geometry, astronomy, and the spiritual significance of numbers. Surrounding the Great Pyramid were smaller satellite pyramids, mastabas for nobles, and temples for rituals. The entire complex was designed for the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. The pyramid itself was a vehicle, a cosmic ramp by which the king's soul could ascend to the heavens and join the gods. Each pyramid project also reinforced the pharaoh's power on earth. They employed thousands, stimulated trade, and demonstrated the ruler's divine favor. To build a pyramid was not only to prepare for eternity, but to shape the present, to unify the kingdom in a single, sacred purpose. As Khufu's son, Jedefre, and his grandson, Khafra, took the throne, they continued the pyramid tradition. Khafra's pyramid, slightly smaller but appearing taller due to higher ground, is accompanied by the Great Sphinx, a colossal statue carved from a single ridge of limestone. With the body of a lion and the head of a king, the Sphinx is a guardian of secrets and a symbol of royal strength. Menkaure, Khafra's successor, built the third and smallest of the main Giza pyramids. Though more modest in scale, it was no less precise or symbolic. Together, the trio formed a skyline that has captivated imaginations for millennia. But the age of the massive pyramids was brief. Over time, Egypt's priorities shifted. Later, pyramids were smaller, hidden, or carved into cliffs, like those in the Valley of the Kings. Yet the influence of the Great Pyramids endured. They became icons of permanence, of divine connection, of human potential. And as we stand today, looking across the sands at these eternal monuments, we are reminded not only of the stones and sweat it took to build them, but of the dreams and devotion that made them rise. As the shadow of the Great Pyramid stretched across the desert sands and the sun dipped below the horizon of Giza, Egypt stood at the height of its architectural achievement. The pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, had left behind structures that would defy time itself. Yet the story of pyramid construction did not end with them. It evolved, adapted, and echoed throughout Egypt's long history. Following the grandeur of Giza, the pyramid tradition began to shift in both form and philosophy. The resources and manpower needed to replicate such colossal structures strained the royal treasury. The centralized control necessary to organize massive workforces was increasingly challenged by rising local elites and shifting political dynamics. Egypt was changing. During the 5th and 6th dynasties, beginning around 2494 BCE, the pyramids became smaller and more modest in appearance. What they lost in scale, however, they gained in detail. These pyramids marked the beginning of a new focus, not just on the outward monument, but on the inner spiritual experience. Pharaohs such as Unas and Teti began inscribing texts within the tomb walls, spells, hymns, and prayers to guide the soul in the afterlife. These are the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings in the world. Etched into the limestone walls in vertical columns, they describe the pharaoh's journey beyond death, offering protection, wisdom, and transformation. The texts speak of ascending to the stars, joining the gods, and avoiding the perils of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. They are poetry and scripture, carved in stone to endure through eternity. This shift reflected a growing complexity in Egyptian religion. The afterlife was no longer the sole privilege of kings. Gradually, nobles and later commoners adopted similar beliefs. The democratization of the afterlife would become one of the most enduring aspects of Egyptian spirituality. Meanwhile, the architecture of pyramids continued to adapt. The outer casings of polished limestone, once radiant in the sun, were increasingly stripped in later periods or lost to time. The inner cores of some pyramids, built with less durable materials, crumbled. As a result, many of these later pyramids appear today as mounds or ruins, ghosts of former grandeur. Yet not all changes were decay. Innovation flourished in other ways. New construction techniques, religious symbolism, and integration with temple complexes created structures of profound meaning. The pyramid became just one part of a sacred landscape, often aligned with solar cults and dedicated to Ra, the sun god. One example is the Pyramid of Sohura at Abusir, which included not only the tomb, but a causeway, mortuary temple, and a valley temple, all richly decorated with scenes of royal power, divine ritual, and daily life. Reliefs depicted not just the gods, but ships, animals, servants, and even foreign emissaries bringing tribute. These images remind us that pyramids were not just tombs. They were statements of ideology, order, and identity. As Egypt approached the end of the Old Kingdom, internal pressures grew. Provincial governors, or nomarchs, amassed power. The central authority weakened. Economic strain and possibly drought led to instability. Pyramid construction became more sporadic, and many projects were abandoned or left unfinished. The first intermediate period followed, a time of fragmentation, competing rulers, and social upheaval. Yet the memory of the pyramids endured. When stability returned with the Middle Kingdom, so too did pyramid building, albeit in a new form. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs, beginning with Amenemhat I around 1991 BCE, chose to build their pyramids in new locations, such as Lisht, Dashur, and Hawara. These pyramids were constructed with mud brick cores and limestone casing, easier and faster to build, but more vulnerable to erosion. Over time, many of these structures deteriorated, yet their internal complexity grew. The Pyramid of Senusret II at El Lahun featured elaborate passageways, hidden entrances, and intricate burial chambers designed to thwart tomb robbers. Despite their best efforts, few tombs escaped looting. Yet the care taken in planning and building reveals how deeply Egyptians valued the sanctity of the tomb and the journey to the afterlife. Even as the form of the pyramid changed, its meaning remained. It was a bridge between earth and sky, a mountain of stone meant to elevate the soul toward the divine. The sloping sides symbolized the rays of the sun, guiding the pharaoh's spirit upward. The pyramid was a cosmic engine, aligning with the stars, anchored in the earth, and reaching for eternity. In the New Kingdom, beginning around 1550 BCE, a dramatic shift occurred. Pharaohs no longer built pyramids in the traditional sense. Instead, they chose hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings, near Thebes. These rock-cut tombs were concealed beneath the cliffs, designed to evade looters and align with a new theology centered around Amun-Ra and the journey through the underworld. Yet even in this era of change, the pyramid retained symbolic power. Small pyramids crowned royal and private tombs, and temple complexes still echoed the geometry and orientation of earlier structures. In Nubia, far to the south, the Kushite kings of the 25th dynasty would revive the pyramid tradition, building steep-sided pyramids at sites like Meroe, smaller in size but rich in symbolism. Centuries later, the Greeks and Romans would marvel at the pyramids. Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE and wrote of the wonders he saw, though his accounts mixed observation with myth. The Romans built monuments inspired by Egypt, and the mystery of the pyramids fed legends across the Mediterranean. Through all of these transitions, the pyramids never truly vanished. They remained, century after century, standing against the elements, intrusions, and time itself. Travelers came to gaze upon them. Pilgrims left offerings. Historians and poets tried to understand their origins. In the modern era, the study of pyramids has advanced through archaeology, engineering, and science. Excavations have revealed workers' villages, tools, ramps, and inscriptions. Radiocarbon dating, satellite imaging, and 3D modeling continue to offer insights, and yet some mysteries remain. Why did pyramid building end? Was it simply cost, politics, or changing theology? Perhaps it was all of these. But what remains clear is that no civilization before or since has so perfectly fused architecture, religion, and cosmic symbolism as the ancient Egyptians did with their pyramids. Today, when you gaze at the pyramids of Giza, or stand among the ruins of Saqqara or Dashur, you are not just seeing stones. You are seeing belief, legacy, and the unbroken thread of memory. These structures were not built to impress, but to endure. And they have done just that. They whisper to us across time. They remind us of what it means to strive for something greater than oneself, to shape stone not just into shelter, but into meaning, to live with one foot in the world and one foot in eternity. And as the stars shine above the desert and the wind stirs through the ancient sands, the pyramids continue their silent vigil, timeless, tireless, and true. Whispers of the gods. As the golden sun sank behind the western desert, casting long shadows across temple walls, a hush would settle over ancient Egypt, a silence not of emptiness, but of reverence. In this stillness, the people listened. They listened for the whisper of gods. In the world of the ancient Egyptians, the divine was everywhere. It shimmered in the water of the Nile, rustled through the leaves of date palms, and echoed from the stone walls of sacred temples. Religion was not a part of life. It was life. Every thought, every action, every harvest, every heartbeat was intertwined with the will of the gods. To the Egyptians, the universe was not born by chance, but crafted with intention. At the beginning of time, there was only the watery abyss, called Nun. From this darkness rose a primeval mound, a single hill of earth, and atop this mound emerged Atum, the first god, who created himself by his own will. From Atum came the other gods, each representing a fundamental aspect of the cosmos: air and moisture, sky and earth, order and chaos, love and judgment. These deities did not live far away in distant heavens. They walked among the people, felt their sorrows, blessed their crops, and received their prayers. Every city in Egypt had its own patron deity, and every home its protective spirits. In Heliopolis, the center of sun worship, Ra reigned supreme. Each morning, he sailed across the sky in his solar bark, bringing light and life. At night, he journeyed through the underworld, battling the serpent of chaos, Apep, to ensure the sun would rise again. This daily cycle was more than a story. It was a reassurance that the world remained in balance. In Thebes, the air was filled with the mystery of Amun, whose name meant the Hidden One. Once a local god, Amun rose to become the king of the gods during the New Kingdom. Merged with Ra as Amun-Ra, he embodied both the power of creation and the promise of protection. His temples, particularly Karnak, were grand cities of stone where priests conducted rituals that echoed with chants and incense. In Memphis, Ptah was worshipped, the god of craftsmen and creation who brought the world into being through speech alone. He was the patron of architects and artisans, those who carved monuments, painted tombs, and built the very temples that honored him. But perhaps the most beloved deity in all of Egypt was Isis, the goddess of magic, motherhood, and healing. She was the devoted wife of Osiris and the mother of Horus. In myth, she gathered the dismembered body of Osiris after he was killed by his jealous brother Set. Through her grief, wisdom, and spells, she restored him to life, allowing him to become the ruler of the afterlife. This act of love and resurrection touched the hearts of all Egyptians, who looked to Isis for comfort and guidance. Osiris himself was central to Egyptian beliefs about death and rebirth. He was the first mummy, the king who had died and risen again. In the Hall of Judgment, it was he who presided over the weighing of the heart ceremony, a ritual that determined the fate of the soul. In this ceremony, the heart of the deceased was placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and balance. If the heart was light, the soul was granted passage to the field of reeds, a paradise of peace and abundance. If heavy with wrongdoing, it was devoured by Ammit, a fearsome creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. To ensure a favorable judgment, the Egyptians prepared for death with great care. Tombs were filled with items for the afterlife: food, tools, clothing, and spells from the Book of the Dead. These spells were not dark or fearful, but full of hope, a guidebook for the soul's journey through the underworld. And then there were the animal-headed gods, whose forms struck awe and wonder. Thoth, with the head of an ibis, was the god of wisdom and writing. He kept records of the god's deeds and maintained the calendar. Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, was a protector of home and hearth. Hathor, with the horns of a cow, embodied joy, music, and motherhood. Sobek, the crocodile god, represented strength and the might of the Nile. Each had temples, festivals, priests, and followers, all woven into the tapestry of daily life. Temples were not places of public worship as they are today. They were the homes of the gods, tended by priests who performed rituals to keep the divine presence alive and benevolent. These rituals were exacting and sacred, bathing statues, dressing them in linen, anointing them with oils, offering food and drink. To neglect a god's needs was to invite disorder into the land. Festivals, however, were times of celebration for everyone. During the Opet festival, the statue of Amun would be carried in procession from Karnak to Luxor, accompanied by music, dancing, and cheers from the crowd. The festival of Wepet Renpet, marking the new year, was filled with renewal and ritual. These events connected the people directly to the divine, reminding them that the gods were near and listening. Dreams, too, were seen as messages from the divine. People visited dream temples in hopes of receiving visions or healing. Amulets, charms, and rituals were part of everyday life, offering protection, luck, and fertility. The spiritual world was not separate. It was part of the fabric of existence. And yet, religion in Egypt was not rigid. It evolved with time. Some gods rose in prominence, while others faded. Local cults flourished, merged, or competed. Akhenaten, a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, would famously attempt a religious revolution, abolishing the traditional pantheon in favor of a single sun god, Aten. His experiment with monotheism was short-lived, but it revealed the depth of religious thinking and the powerful connection between theology and rule. After his death, the old gods were restored, and Egypt's spiritual life returned to its deep roots. The priests, temples, and myths continued to shape the consciousness of a civilization that saw no distinction between the physical and the spiritual. Even today, when we gaze at the statues of Horus, the murals of Anubis, or the inscriptions calling on Isis and Osiris, we feel a connection to something vast and enduring. The gods of ancient Egypt may no longer be worshipped, but their whispers still drift on the desert wind. They live in the stories, the symbols, the stars, and in the quiet hearts of those who remember. The fall of the empire. For thousands of years, ancient Egypt stood as a beacon of power, culture, and divine order. A civilization shaped by the rhythm of the Nile, guarded by gods, and ruled by god-kings. Its monuments reached toward the heavens. Its art captured eternal truths, and its influence rippled across lands far beyond its own. But no empire, however radiant, lasts forever. The decline of ancient Egypt was not sudden. It did not collapse in a single catastrophic event, but rather faded like a star, slowly, subtly, and in phases. It was a story of pressures from within and invasions from without, of changing ideologies, political fragmentation, and the long, patient erosion of power. To understand the fall of Egypt, we must return to the end of the New Kingdom, around 1070 BCE. The pharaohs of the 18th and 19th dynasties had expanded Egypt's borders, reaching into Syria and Nubia, commanding respect and tribute from powerful neighbors. But by the 20th dynasty, signs of strain began to show. Ramses III, the last of the great warrior pharaohs, ruled during a time of external threat and internal tension. Invasions by the so-called Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of seafaring tribes, challenged Egypt's military strength. Ramses managed to repel them, but at great cost. His reign was marked by inflation, labor unrest, and one of the earliest known worker strikes in recorded history. After his death, the central government weakened. Local priests, especially those of Amun in Thebes, grew more powerful than the kings they ostensibly served. In Lower Egypt, pharaohs struggled to maintain order. The once unified kingdom split in two. The high priests of Amun effectively ruled the south, while the north was governed from Tanis by a line of nominal pharaohs. This period, known as the Third Intermediate Period, was a time of division and fragmentation. Dynasties overlapped, foreign influences grew, and Egypt became more a patchwork of competing powers than a unified empire. The Libyans, who had long served as mercenaries in the Egyptian army, began to rise in influence. Eventually, Libyan chieftains became pharaohs themselves, founding the 22nd and 23rd dynasties. These rulers adopted Egyptian customs, worshipped Egyptian gods, and were buried in Egyptian-style tombs. Yet the sense of divine continuity, the sacred thread that had connected the earliest kings to the gods, was fraying. Local rulers prioritized regional control over national unity. Wealth was concentrated in temples, particularly those of Amun, creating tensions between religious and royal authority. Amid this uncertainty, Egypt's neighbors grew stronger. In the south, the kingdom of Kush, once ruled by Egypt, emerged as a formidable power. The Kushite kings revered Egyptian culture and saw themselves as its rightful heirs. In the 8th century BCE, Payi, a Kushite ruler, marched north, conquering Egypt and establishing the 25th dynasty. The Kushite pharaohs ruled with reverence for tradition. They restored temples, revived old customs, and commissioned statues and inscriptions that echoed the grandeur of earlier dynasties. They built pyramids in Nubia and reconnected Egypt with its sacred past. But their reign was not to last. To the east, a new power was rising, the Assyrian Empire. Fierce and expansionist, the Assyrians saw Egypt as both a rival and a prize. In 671 BCE, they invaded. Pharaoh Taharqa resisted bravely, but the Assyrians were relentless. Memphis was captured, and eventually the Assyrians installed puppet rulers in the north. Though the Kushites retained control in the south for a time, Egypt was now a land caught between foreign powers. After the Assyrians withdrew, local princes from Sais in the western delta rose to power. This marked the beginning of the 26th dynasty, also known as the Sate period, a final renaissance of sorts. Under Psamtik I and his successors, Egypt experienced a brief revival. Trade resumed, temples were rebuilt, and artistic traditions flourished. Yet this rebirth was fragile. In 525 BCE, the Achaemenid Persians, led by Cambyses II, invaded. The Persians defeated the Egyptians at the Battle of Pelusium and took control of the kingdom. Cambyses crowned himself pharaoh, adopting Egyptian titles and religious rituals. But Persian rule was distant and impersonal. Egypt was now a province of a foreign empire, its autonomy curtailed. There were brief moments of resistance, rebellions and short-lived native dynasties, but they were quickly quashed. The Second Persian period began in 343 BCE, but it would be short-lived. Just a decade later, a new conqueror appeared on the horizon, Alexander the Great. In 332 BCE, Alexander entered Egypt to little resistance. The Egyptians, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. He visited the oracle at Siwa Oasis, where he was declared the son of Zeus Ammon, aligning himself with Egyptian religious tradition. He founded the city of Alexandria, destined to become a great center of learning and culture. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy seized control of Egypt and established the Ptolemaic dynasty. Though Greek in origin, the Ptolemies adopted Egyptian customs, religion, and iconography. Pharaohs once again walked in temples, offered prayers to Isis, and built monuments in traditional style. Yet beneath the surface, Egypt was changing. Greek and Egyptian cultures coexisted, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes tensely. The elite spoke Greek. Administration was carried out in both Greek and Demotic scripts. Temples remained active, and priests still recited hymns in hieroglyphs. But Hellenistic philosophy, art, and science reshaped Egyptian identity. For centuries, the Ptolemies maintained control. Cleopatra VII, the most famous of their line, sought to preserve Egypt's independence through diplomacy and alliance. But her fate was tied to Rome. After the deaths of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and her own tragic end in 30 BCE, Egypt fell to Octavian, later Augustus, and became a Roman province. With this, pharaonic Egypt came to an end. The temples remained, but the priests lost their power. The old gods were gradually abandoned, their sacred texts untranslated and forgotten. Christianity spread through Egypt, followed centuries later by Islam, each leaving its mark on the land and its people. And yet, something of the ancient world lingered. The pyramids stood as they always had, weathered but proud. The Nile still flowed, the same as it had in the days of Narmer and Ramses. The stories of Osiris, Isis, and Horus lived on, transformed and reimagined through centuries of belief. It was not until the 19th century that the modern world began to rediscover Egypt's ancient past. Archaeologists, linguists, and explorers uncovered tombs, translated hieroglyphs, and pieced together the lives of kings and commoners alike. The Rosetta Stone, found in 1799, unlocked the language of the pharaohs, opening the door to a forgotten civilization. Today, we walk through the ruins of temples, gaze upon statues weathered by time, and read the prayers once carved into walls by flickering torchlight. Egypt's fall was long, layered, and complex, but its spirit endures. The fall of the empire was not the end of Egypt. It was the beginning of a legacy, one that continues to inspire awe, curiosity, and wonder across the world. The echoes of time. Even as centuries passed and empires rose and fell, the voice of ancient Egypt never truly fell silent. It echoed in stone, whispered through ruins, and lingered in myths that traveled far from the banks of the Nile. Though the temples quieted and the gods faded from daily worship, the spirit of the pharaohs endured, in memory, in mystery, and in the enduring fascination they inspire to this day. For the ancient Egyptians, to be forgotten was the greatest misfortune. Names were carved into walls, chanted in rituals, and written in sacred texts, not just for glory, but for eternity. To speak the name of the dead was to give them life. And indeed, though thousands of years have passed, we still speak the names. Ramses, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra. They have never truly vanished. Much of what we know about Egypt today is thanks to the persistence of its people and the resilience of its monuments. Temples weathered by wind and sand still stand. Tombs, long sealed beneath the desert, were eventually uncovered, their walls vibrant with scenes of gods and pharaohs, farmers and musicians, funerals and feasts. The past was not erased, it was simply waiting. The modern rediscovery of ancient Egypt began with curiosity and wonder. In 1798, Napoleon's expedition to Egypt included not just soldiers, but scientists and artists. They studied temples, sketched hieroglyphs, and marveled at pyramids. Among their discoveries was a black basalt slab near Rosetta, a stone bearing a decree written in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. This Rosetta Stone would become the key to unlocking a forgotten language. It was a French scholar, Jean-François Champollion, who finally deciphered the hieroglyphs in 1822. With that breakthrough, a floodgate opened. Words that had remained silent for 2,000 years could once again be read. The ancient Egyptians began to speak. Since then, archaeology has uncovered a rich, layered history. The tomb of Tutankhamun, with its golden mask and untouched treasures. The vast necropolises of Saqqara and Thebes. Scrolls of papyrus preserved in desert air. Everyday tools, games, and jewelry that bring us close to the people who once lived along the Nile. But Egypt's echo is more than its relics. It is its influence. Greek and Roman thinkers were inspired by Egyptian knowledge. Medieval travelers wrote of the pyramids with awe and speculation. The Renaissance and Enlightenment saw Egypt as a cradle of wisdom. Even today, its art, architecture, and mythology appear in films, novels, museums, and classrooms around the world. There is something enduring in Egypt's vision of the world, a sense of continuity, of cosmic order, of life connected to land, sky, and spirit. It tells us that our stories matter, that death is not an end, and that beauty is a form of truth. To walk in Egypt today is to walk in the presence of the ancient. The call to prayer mingles with the silent gaze of statues carved millennia ago. Children play near temples once sacred to Ra and Hathor. Farmers tend fields along the Nile as their ancestors did, watching the waters rise and fall with the seasons. The past is not distant here. It is layered into the present. And so, the echoes continue, not as a fading song, but as a living harmony. The gods may no longer be worshipped, but their symbols endure. The pharaohs may no longer rule, but their vision of eternity still speaks. To listen to Egypt is to hear not just the voice of a vanished world, but the heartbeat of something eternal. A whisper through the sands, a sigh from the stones, the echo of time itself. Secrets beneath the sand. Beneath the golden blanket of Egypt's desert lies a hidden world. Forgotten tombs, sealed chambers, buried cities, and ancient mysteries waiting to be revealed. The sands of Egypt are not merely a backdrop. They are guardians of the past, preserving history in silence, concealing wonders beneath their surface for thousands of years. From the earliest days of exploration, travelers to Egypt sensed that the desert hid more than it revealed. The pyramids, majestic though they were, hinted at greater secrets. Every temple ruin, every eroded statue, every fragment of stone called out to the curious. And slowly, cautiously, the sands began to yield their treasures. Much of what we know today about ancient Egypt comes not from towering monuments, but from what lay buried and forgotten. Tombs filled with vivid paintings and delicate jewelry, sealed crypts filled with scrolls and statues, tools left where they were last used. Each discovery adds a piece to the intricate puzzle of Egypt's past. In 1922, One of the most extraordinary discoveries in archaeological history took place in the Valley of the Kings. Howard Carter, after years of searching, uncovered the tomb of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun. Unlike many other royal tombs, this one had remained largely undisturbed. Inside, they found a dazzling collection of artifacts, chariots, thrones, perfumes, ceremonial beds, and a golden mask that became a symbol of ancient Egypt itself. But Tutankhamun's tomb was not the largest or most grand. It was simply untouched. His burial, modest by royal standards, offered a glimpse of how even a relatively minor pharaoh was honored in death. It raised new questions. What more remains hidden? What lies in tombs still sealed? The Valley of the Kings alone holds more than 60 tombs, with many still unexplored or only partially examined. Some archaeologists believe that undiscovered chambers may still lie beneath the ground, protected by rock, time, and myth. Modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, infrared imaging, satellite mapping, is now helping to peer beneath the surface without disturbing what lies below. Saqqara, the ancient necropolis near Memphis, has also continued to surprise. In recent years, dozens of wooden coffins, perfectly preserved and elaborately painted, have been unearthed in shafts descending deep into the earth. Some of these burials date back more than 2,500 years, and new discoveries continue to emerge. Entire burial temples, statues, and inscriptions offering insight into later dynasties. The sands have protected not only tombs, but entire cities. At Tel El Amarna, the remains of a city founded by the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten reveal an abrupt and radical attempt to reshape Egyptian society. Streets, homes, bakeries, temples, and official buildings lay as they were left, offering a snapshot of a society mid-revolution. Even in the depths of the Nile Delta, where rising groundwater and modern development complicate excavation, new finds emerge. Underwater archaeology in the Mediterranean has uncovered the lost cities of Thonis Herakleion and Canopus, once vibrant port cities that sank beneath the sea. Their discovery has revealed statues, temples, ships, and inscriptions, submerged for over a millennium. Each layer of sand peeled away is a journey backward in time. But excavation is slow, meticulous work. Archaeologists brush away grains of history with care and patience. Every object, no matter how small, holds meaning. A pottery shard, a comb, a child's toy, or a faded scroll might unlock an entire chapter of Egypt's story. Yet there is something sacred in the mystery itself. Not every tomb must be opened. Not every secret revealed. The ancient Egyptians believed in the power of rest, in the holiness of the sealed tomb. To disturb the dead without purpose was to risk disrupting the balance of Ma'at, the harmony of the cosmos. Modern Egyptologists balance scientific curiosity with respect. For every tomb explored, many more are left untouched, waiting. Some believe the tomb of Nefertiti has yet to be found. Others search for the burial of Imhotep, the architect of the first pyramid. Still others scan the desert for the lost tombs of forgotten queens and generals. But secrets beneath the sand are not just about the past. They shape the present. Egypt's archaeological sites fuel education, tourism, national pride, and global fascination. New discoveries captivate the world, reminding us that history is not static. It lives, buried and breathing, waiting to be remembered. And as long as the sands remain, Egypt's secrets will remain too, hidden in silence, waiting for the moment they can speak again. The Nile never sleeps. Long before the first stone was laid at Giza, long before the name of any pharaoh was etched into the annals of history, the Nile flowed. It wound its way through a sun-drenched landscape, carving life into the heart of the desert. It was then, as it is now, a ribbon of water threading through sand and stone, carrying the lifeblood of a civilization that would one day rise to shape the ancient world. The Nile never sleeps, and through its endless movement, it has become the most constant witness to Egypt's enduring story. To the ancient Egyptians, the Nile was not merely a river. It was a divine artery, pulsing with the magic of creation. It was the domain of Hapi, the god of the inundation, whose floods came each year, not with destruction, but with the promise of rebirth. When the river swelled with the waters of distant rains, it delivered a gift of black silt to the land, a layer of fertility that transformed barren stretches into fields rich with grain, flax, and papyrus. This cycle, dependable and sacred, defined the rhythm of Egyptian life. The year was divided not by celestial seasons, but by the moods of the river. Akhet, the season of inundation; Peret, the season of growth; and Shemu, the season of harvest. The Nile was a clock, a calendar, and a compass. It dictated when to plant, when to reap, when to celebrate, and when to mourn. Its waters served as Egypt's great highway. Long boats with sails like wings glided north with the current or south with the wind, connecting the cities and temples along its banks. Through these watery roads, not only goods and crops traveled, but ideas, beliefs, and culture. It was upon the Nile that pharaohs sent their decrees and traders brought exotic wares. It was where priests traveled with sacred relics, and where mourners carried the dead to their final resting places in the West. The Nile was also a line between worlds. To the east lay the realm of the living, cities, temples, fields, and festivals. To the west lay the necropolis, a place where the sun died each day and where the departed journeyed into the afterlife. This duality was not only symbolic, but geographic. Every aspect of Egyptian spirituality was reflected in the orientation of their lives with respect to the river. Along its course rose the cities of myth and memory: Thebes, home of Karnak and Luxor, where columns reached like reeds into the sky; Memphis, the ancient capital, whose walls once guarded palaces and shrines; Abydos, the sacred gateway to the underworld, and all around them, smaller villages and settlements dotted the riverbanks, each with its own life and rhythm, all drawn to the river like planets around a star. The Nile was not always calm. At times, it raged with unexpected floods, or dwindled into shallow silence during years of poor rains. In those moments, Egypt trembled. Without the Nile's abundance, crops withered, hunger spread, and the divine balance, Ma'at, was threatened. Prayers rose from every quarter of the land, offerings were made, and the people waited, watched, and hoped for the return of the river's grace. Yet, even in its unpredictability, the Nile remained the center of faith. Its cycles taught patience, its currents taught trust, and its boundless journey from unknown mountains to the wide sea mirrored the path of life itself. Birth, growth, decay, renewal. All were held in the river's embrace. And though the gods have changed, the temples have faded, and the voices of the pharaohs have grown still, the Nile flows on. In modern Egypt, it courses past skyscrapers and ancient ruins, irrigates cotton fields and bustling markets. Children still swim in its waters. Farmers still till its banks. Women still draw water from its edge. It is both old and new, a timeless thread weaving the past into the present. It whispers through Cairo, sings past Aswan, and stretches its fingers into the Mediterranean. And as it flows, it remembers. Every drop carries the memory of chants in Karnak, of lotus petals drifting past Abu Simbel, of the boat that bore the body of a king toward eternity. The Nile has outlived dynasties, outlasted invasions, and overcome drought. It is not merely a part of Egypt, it is Egypt. Its song is the pulse of a people, its breath the rhythm of history. And so, as night falls and the stars wheel overhead, just as they did when the first farmers watched the floods return and the first kings were laid to rest, the Nile keeps flowing. It does not stop. It does not sleep. It carries with it the weight of centuries and the hope of tomorrow. The Nile never sleeps, and as long as it flows, the spirit of Egypt endures, from stone to stardust. Ancient Egypt was carved from the earth, chiseled in stone, anchored in sand, grounded by the flow of the Nile. And yet, its gaze was always skyward. For all its reverence for the land, Egypt looked to the stars with wonder, curiosity, and belief. It saw in the heavens a reflection of the divine order it strove to uphold on earth. The result was a civilization both rooted in stone and reaching towards stardust. To the ancient Egyptians, the sky was not a void. It was a tapestry of meaning. The stars were not distant balls of gas, but gods, spirits, and eternal souls. The sun, Ra, crossed the sky each day and journeyed through the underworld at night. The moon, Thoth's eye, waxed and waned with precision. The planets moved with purpose, and constellations told stories of kings and gods. One of the most sacred celestial symbols was the star Sirius, known to the Egyptians as Sopdet. Each year, Sirius would vanish from the sky, only to return just before dawn during midsummer. This event, known as the heliacal rising of Sirius, coincided with the annual flooding of the Nile. It was a sign of rebirth, of life returning to the land, and of the goddess Isis, with whom the star was associated, weeping tears that caused the river to swell. This connection between sky and earth was more than spiritual. It was scientific. The Egyptians used Sirius to mark the beginning of their calendar year, creating one of the earliest known systems of timekeeping. They tracked the movements of the sun and moon, measured solstices and equinoxes, and understood the need to align their monuments with the heavens. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built over 4,500 years ago, is not only a marvel of engineering, it is also a cosmic structure. Its sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, and its shafts are thought to have been positioned to point towards specific stars, including Orion's Belt, a constellation associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife. These were not coincidences. They were deliberate expressions of cosmic harmony. The Egyptians believed that just as the stars moved in predictable ordered paths, so too must human society be governed by ma'at, balance, justice, and truth. Astronomy, for them, was not only a science, but a form of philosophy and worship. Temples were constructed with celestial alignment in mind. At Abu Simbel, the inner sanctuary is illuminated by the rising sun on only 2 days of the year, believed to mark the birth and coronation of Ramses II. At Karnak, the temple axis is aligned with the midwinter sunrise. These alignments were designed to invite the gods into sacred spaces, to allow light itself to become a ritual participant. Even death was framed in the language of the stars. Pharaohs were buried beneath celestial ceilings, painted with constellations, their souls destined to ascend to the heavens and become imperishable stars. The pyramid texts speak of the king traveling on solar boats, joining Ra in his daily journey, or rising as a star in the northern sky. The cosmos was not far away. It was the next step in existence. But Egypt's contributions to science extended beyond the sky. In medicine, the Egyptians practiced surgery, developed antiseptics, and documented treatments for hundreds of ailments. Papyrus scrolls such as the Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri reveal a sophisticated understanding of the human body and diseases. In mathematics, they calculated volumes, areas, and slopes, knowledge essential for pyramid construction. Their number system, while not as advanced as later Greek or Indian systems, allowed for practical computation, record-keeping, and architectural planning. They observed the world carefully, recording floods, planting seasons, and astronomical events with precision. This careful observation created a body of knowledge passed down through generations, some of which would reach Greece, Rome, and beyond, forming part of the bedrock of Western science. The influence of Egypt's cosmology and science can be felt even in modern times. Symbols like the Ankh, the Eye of Horus, and the scarab have been reinterpreted and rediscovered. The fascination with mummies and tombs led to advances in archaeology, preservation, and our understanding of ancient medicine. The dream of aligning heaven and earth, of understanding our place in the cosmos, continues to inspire astronomers, philosophers, and artists alike. There is something timeless in Egypt's approach to the universe, a belief that we are not alone in the void, that our lives are part of a grander rhythm, that death is not an end, but a return, a rejoining of the stars from which we came. And so, though the statues have crumbled and the scrolls have faded, Egypt's vision of the cosmos endures. In observatories and planetariums, in books and telescopes, we still search the skies with the same questions that once stirred priests in Thebes and stargazers in the desert. Who are we? Why are we here? What lies beyond? In the silence between the stars, the ancient voices whisper back. They remind us that the stones beneath our feet and the stars above our heads are made of the same dust. That knowledge is sacred. That wonder is eternal. From stone to stardust, the journey continues. The land of forever. There is a stillness in Egypt that cannot be explained by time alone. It is not the silence of ruins or the hush of the desert wind. It is something deeper, a quiet that feels sacred, timeless, suspended between what was and what will be. This stillness, this sense of eternity, has drawn people for thousands of years to gaze upon crumbling columns, to run their fingers across sun-warmed stone, and to listen for whispers from the past. Egypt is not simply a place. It is an idea, a vision of permanence, a land of forever. To understand Egypt is to understand a civilization that believed more deeply in the power of continuity than perhaps any other. The people of the Nile did not see death as an end, but as a transformation. They viewed the cosmos as a layered system of life, spirit, and divine order. Their tombs were not graves, they were homes. Their temples were not monuments, they were living spaces for gods. And their writing, carved deeply into stone, was not simply communication, it was a means to eternity. This desire for permanence can be seen everywhere in ancient Egyptian life. In the scale of their architecture, we find evidence of a people who thought not in years or decades, but in centuries and millennia. The pyramids of Giza were constructed not merely to impress, but to endure. Their placement, orientation, and construction all speak to an obsession with the eternal. Aligned with the stars, grounded in sacred geometry, and built to withstand time and weather, these pyramids are more than tombs. They are prayers in stone. Yet the desire for forever went beyond royalty. Even the humblest Egyptians prepared for the afterlife with care. Shabti figurines, amulets, funerary texts, and painted coffins have been found in even modest burials. Each item was placed with intent, meant to accompany the soul on its journey through the underworld and into the field of reeds. An eternal, idealized version of life along the Nile. This field of reeds was not a vague paradise. It was a place of farming, of family, of peace and prosperity. It mirrored earthly life, only perfected. The belief that life could continue after death, improved and everlasting, shaped every aspect of Egyptian culture. It informed their laws, inspired their art, and justified the rule of their kings, who were seen as divine custodians of Ma'at, the balance and harmony that held the universe together. Ma'at was more than a goddess. She was a principle, a cosmic force. She represented truth, justice, and balance. Every pharaoh took on the sacred duty of maintaining Ma'at, and every person, from scribe to servant, was expected to live in accordance with it. To disrupt Ma'at was to invite chaos, and thus the rituals, ceremonies, and even the architecture of Egypt were designed to reinforce order and permanence. Temples, for instance, were constructed as microcosms of the universe. Their walls depicted creation myths, their columns were carved like lotus and papyrus, their ceilings painted with stars. Walking through a temple was not merely a religious act, it was a symbolic journey through the cosmos. At the center of the temple, hidden from public view, the sanctuary housed a statue of the god, a representation of divine presence on earth. The rituals performed there were not performances, but necessary acts to sustain the world. The Egyptian concept of time also reflected their eternal mindset. They had two words for time, Naher, which referred to cyclical, repeating time, like the rising of the sun or the annual flood of the Nile, and Jet, which meant linear, eternal time, the unchanging continuation of the cosmos. Pharaohs aspire to pass from Neher into Jet, to become part of the eternal order, never to be forgotten. In this way, memory itself became a sacred duty. To remember the dead was to keep them alive. Names were inscribed on tomb walls, spoken in rituals, and preserved in family lineages. The worst fate imaginable was to be forgotten, to suffer the second death when one's name was no longer spoken. This is why even the smallest grave often bore inscriptions, and why great care was taken to ensure the dead were honored through festivals and offerings. This reverence for memory extended to the written word. Hieroglyphs, the sacred script of Egypt, were not merely functional. They were art, magic, and theology all at once. Every stroke, every symbol was crafted with precision. Inscriptions were placed not only to inform, but to transform, to make the word eternal. A name carved into stone was not simply a label, it was a form of survival. And so Egypt became a place where time folded in on itself, where the past was not left behind but carried forward, where a pharaoh could live on in his image, in his name, in the prayers of priests who stood before his statue 1,000 years after his death, where each sunrise was a reenactment of creation, and each temple a blueprint of the cosmos. In this first part of our final chapter, we begin to see Egypt not just as a nation of rulers and monuments, but as a civilization that wove eternity into every aspect of life. In stone, in ritual, in the turning of the stars, the Egyptians found ways to defy the transience of life. They sought not just to live, but to last. And in doing so, they created a legacy that still speaks across the ages, whispering through the dust and wind of a land that has always known how to wait. In the hush of the desert wind and the shadow of the temples, the dream of eternity lives on. Egypt's vision of forever was not bound to its borders or confined to its tombs. It became a way of seeing the world, a philosophy cast in stone and echoed in every prayer, procession, and pillar. It is a vision that did not die with the last pharaoh. Instead, it drifted outward, crossing centuries and continents, embedding itself in the imagination of the world. Even after foreign empires swept through Egypt, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, the spirit of permanence endured. The invaders may have brought new gods and languages, but they too marveled at what the Egyptians had created. They studied their architecture, copied their forms, and in many cases preserved their stories. The Greeks, especially under the Ptolemies, adopted Egyptian customs. Cleopatra herself was not just a ruler, she was the embodiment of Isis, dressed in the rituals and language of the old ways. The Romans, too, honored the land they conquered. They restored temples, erected statues in the likeness of Egyptian deities, and inscribed Latin prayers alongside hieroglyphs. Even as Egypt became part of wider empires, it remained, in its core, timeless, unchanged in essence, revered for its grandeur. But time, ever patient, began to erode the clarity of memory. The hieroglyphs fell silent. The names of gods faded from daily speech. Temples were buried by sand, dismantled for stone, or overtaken by new faiths. The eternal land entered a long sleep, waiting beneath the surface. And yet, even in silence, it endured. The rediscovery of ancient Egypt in the modern era reignited a fascination that had never fully vanished. When Napoleon's scholars arrived in the 18th century, they saw more than ruins. They saw echoes, forms and structures that hinted at immense knowledge and vision. The Rosetta Stone, found in 1799, became the key to unlocking a forgotten language. With it, scholars began to hear the ancient voices again. The past began to speak. Since then, the land of forever has steadily revealed its secrets. Archaeologists, historians, and artists have unearthed tombs, decoded texts, and pieced together lives long vanished. Every discovery, a burial chamber sealed for millennia, a temple roof uncovered, a new scroll preserved in sand, adds a stroke to the portrait of a civilization that sought to outlast time. But the story of Egypt is not only told by scholars, it lives in the wonder of those who gaze at the pyramids for the first time, in the reverence of those who walk through the halls of Karnak, in the quiet awe that comes from standing in the presence of something truly ancient. The Egyptian dream of eternity was not selfish. It was expansive. It invited others to look beyond their moment and glimpse the infinite. To be eternal is not only to resist decay, it is to inspire across time, to kindle thought in those not yet born, to endure not in form alone, but in feeling. In this way, Egypt has succeeded. It has lived far beyond its years. It has entered not just Jet, the eternal linear time of the ancients, but also our collective imagination. Its symbols, myths, and monuments are woven into literature, art, philosophy, and science. Its understanding of harmony and balance continues to inform our search for meaning. Even now, Egypt teaches. In a world that rushes ever forward, its monuments remind us to pause, to consider what is lasting, to build not only for utility, but for beauty, to honor the past, shape the present, and dream of a future that connects rather than severs. And so the land of forever endures, not only in stone, but in the minds and hearts of those who remember. It teaches that time is not an enemy, but a medium, that memory is sacred, that there is value in permanence, not as resistance to change, but as a celebration of continuity. The sun still rises over the Nile. The winds still carry whispers through the tombs. And if you stand very still in the temple shadows, you may feel it too, that quiet, eternal presence that has never truly faded. A sense that you are not just in a place, but in a dream that never ended. A vision of what it means to be remembered, to belong to time, and to transcend it. This is the land of forever, and it still breathes.